Hi, and thanks for watching this message video, and don't forget to go through the life lesson that goes with it. And for those who can't make a Sunday, don't forget that there's a podcast of that sermon that goes along with this message video, kind of a part one, part two thing. Today, we're finishing up our series on Christ-centered Christmas movies, and the movie that we're looking at is the 1946 film, It's a Wonderful Life, starring Jimmy Stewart as George Bailey. And anybody who has seen this film or movie knows that the themes in it contain things like, well, depression and disappointment, tragedy, and even suicide. However, there are also the themes of great, faithful friendships and persistent prayer. And, of course, with the help of an angel, in the end, a wonderful life is saved. However, it begs this question. If suicidal ideation increases during the holidays and 45 to 50% of the people say they wish they could skip the holidays due to tragedy, disappointment, and depression, what can we as Christians do around the holidays to help others see their lives as wonderful? You see, when I see this movie, or when I view this movie, what I think of is really, this is a battle of wills. There's George's will for his life and his plans for his life, and then there's God's plan or his will for George's life. And we can see from the very beginning of this movie that George's will or George's plan for his life was that he was going to be a big deal and he was going to do things, and that had always been his plan, even since he was a small boy. However, we can see that even as a small boy, his plans were thwarted, and as a result, we can see that God's plans were actually working out. Which again begs these questions. Based on passages like James 14 through 16, how should we approach making plans like what George was doing? And if you've seen the movie, do you think George's ear injury as a boy was just a consequence of heroism or a crucial part of God's plan? Because of George's ear injury and because of a strong sense of love and loyalty to his dad, George never got to experience his dream of travel, which in and of itself is not a bad dream. In fact, just so nobody confuses or misunderstands what James, the brother of Jesus, said, God doesn't have a problem when we make life plans that are based on his will. But when we cling to them without any consideration for his will, that creates problems. And let's face it, George was pretty hyper-focused on his own plans, clinging to them, you could say. And because of that, George couldn't see that God's perfect and pleasing will or his plans had already been revealed to him, which again begs these questions. Based on Romans 12, 1 and 2, what must we do first before learning what God's perfect will is for our lives? And if you've seen the movie, what do you think God's perfect will was for George's life? If we are ever going to stop copying the behaviors and customs of everybody else in this world and truly learn what God's perfect and pleasing will is for our lives, as Paul said, that means that we need to give our bodies, or in other words, our will, over to God, and then accept that whatever his will is for our lives is a good thing. In fact, our surrendered life as a sacrifice to God is the only kind of offering that's acceptable as worship to him. And when we truly worship God this way, that's when he begins to transform our lives by changing the way we think, and then that changes the way that we act. However, a lot of us, like George, we need a nudge in order to start thinking this way. And we're told in the movie, if you've seen it, that God sends an angel, Clarence, to nudge him, help him start thinking this way. But the reason why Clarence was sent, we're told, is because of the persistent prayers of all of these different people who truly were George's friends, which again begs these questions. Based on Ephesians 6:18, what do you think it means to be persistent in prayer for someone? And is there anyone in your life that you should be in persistent prayer for? In the movie It's a Wonderful Life, Clarence the angel helped George Bailey to see that he was clinging to his own will, that he was clinging to his own plans, and that he was doing so without any consideration for what God's will was, which had already been revealed to him. And that the battle of these two wills almost cost George his life. However, After seeing what the world would look like without his impact, George realized something critically important, and that instead of ending his life, the best thing to do was actually to offer God his life, which is actually the only way that we can worship him. And in doing so, George found out that that's what leads to a wonderful life. This shift in perspective is so critically important that it's what I'm going to be talking about on Sunday, and I hope you can join me.
For behold, I bring you tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord.